All right, good afternoon, everybody. I am going to go ahead and get things started here. Thanks for joining us today for the Explicit Instruction Follow-Up Webinar with Anita Archer. My name is Jackie, and I'll be your host today. I have a couple quick details to review before we get started. If you have questions, please feel free to submit them via the Q&A box on your screen. Make sure to include me as the host along with the presenter so I can track them to review with Anita at the end of the session. If you're viewing the webinar on a PC or Windows machine, the icons to track down to get to the chat or the Q&A box are in the upper right corner above where Anita is presenting. If you're on a Mac, the icons are in the lower right corner of your window, and they're kind of small little icons all in a row there, not very clear to see. If you're having technical difficulties during the webinar, please send a message to me as the host directly, and I'll try to help you get sorted out. Sometimes we have groups that run into hiccups with the audio broadcast if lots of people at the school all jump on the internet at the same time. If you run into trouble there, we can get you the phone number to call into the audio broadcast. As always, we're going to record today's webinar, and we'll make it available on the webpage with Anita's previously recorded webinars, and we'll send that email out in a couple days once it's live there. All that said, we'll get things turned over to Anita.
Happy day to all of you. What a delight to look down at the names of my friends from some of the TOTs as a total delight. And I got an email asking, could we share these in small PDs that we do? Of course, the purpose here is dissemination, and that is exactly what the intent was of the writer. So our topic today, again, was one that was requested, and that was we are doing explicit instruction. We are doing active participation. We are doing I do it, we do it, you do it. But many times when we observe, teachers are getting responses from students, but not necessarily altering the lesson or giving feedback. So could you go a little deeper into embedded formative assessment? Now, there is an exciting topic, embedded formative assessment. But for this preparation, first of all, I had the gift of working in Modesto, California, and working with 3 groups of teachers at different grade levels at the elementary level. And so I got to really study up on this. And if you haven't, I highly recommend that you read, if we can get that there, Embedded Formative Assessment by Dylan William, an excellent resource on this whole topic. And then the companion book, Embedding Informative Assessment, also by Dylan William. And this one is the practical application of it. Terrific reads for a very important concept. So let's get started and first see how embedded formative assessment would fit into the big picture of explicit instruction. So when we look at explicit instruction, we could look at it in this way, that I am teaching a group of students, or I am teaching one student or a small group of students, and I first have a learning intention, what I want them to know, what I want them to learn, what I want to hold them accountable for, what I want to hold myself accountable for, ensuring that they've learned it. And I'm going to have a success criteria. What would indicate to me if they have learned it? What would indicate to them if they've learned it? And then I am going to have some input. I'm going to model. I am going to give information to them. I'm going to introduce a strategy. And throughout that instruction, I am going to request that they make a response. I'm going to ask a question or give them a task, and they're going to say things or write things or do things. This is all very familiar to you because this is the flow of explicit instruction. And then, based on their responses, I'm going to monitor very carefully, listen carefully. I'm going to look at their work carefully. I'm even going to move around the room and circulate that walk around, look around, talk around. And one reason I'm going to do this is to give them feedback. You know, I was recently looking at some of John Hattie's recent summaries of research, and it appears that feedback may even have a higher effect size of 0.91 than what we gave it earlier. So I'm going to give feedback to the group. Let me go over that problem with you after you've done it so the whole group can benefit. Some kids will be affirmed and some students will be corrected. I'm going to also, as I monitor, give feedback to individuals with that peck. Praise, encourage, correct. But I'm also, based on my monitoring in response to their response, I'm going to adjust the lesson right in the moment. They need more clarity. I need to give another example. I need to provide more practice. I need to assist them. I need to have a small group follow-up. Or I'm going to also adjust my next lesson. Oh, I better reteach this, but I wasn't very clear. I need to go over that again. I need to give them more practice so that they can get to automaticity. Or we're going to move on because they're doing so well. So this is sort of the ongoing picture of what we do on a daily basis, embedded in a math lesson, a science lesson, a social studies lesson, a reading lesson. Input, question, response. Monitor that response, give feedback, and adjust. But we have to be careful not to stop at the response. Get a response from them, and then continue teaching where we aren't systematically providing feedback or adjusting our lessons. So let us look at this a little bit deeper in terms of one question I'm often given. And that is, when we have checking for understanding, how does eliciting responses and active participation fit in? Well, active participation has many purposes, one of which is embedded formative assessment, but it's not the only one. So if I'm teaching a lesson in kindergarten and I'm introducing sounds, I'm getting responses from the students for many purposes. One, though, is to be certain that they are accurate in those sounds, that they're learning the sounds. But you're going to be engaged here, so you say the answers with me. So when I get responses, I do want to increase their attention. I want to increase their on-task behavior. Those two go together. I want to increase their engagement. And one I believe is really important, particularly for those who are viewing, who are secondary, I want to hold them accountable for being present and participating. And when I have many responses, yes, they're more attentive, more on task, more engaged, more accountable. Those are all the desired behaviors that I want. So the desired behaviors go up and the inappropriate behaviors go down. So it's a management tool. And it just keeps things moving along. So it makes a difference in terms of the pace of the lesson. So these are all reasons for getting responses. Another that we've discussed often is the big picture in instruction, and that is, I am teaching and I want to teach in such a way that you are learning. And so when I have you respond, it focuses your attention on critical content. You have to practice the information. You're getting practice, and many times you're also retrieving it, that retrieval practice that leads to retention. So we know that getting responses helps create an environment of instruction, of attentive students, engaged students, students that are giving appropriate behavior versus inappropriate. And we know it definitely increases learning through rehearsal and retrieval. But also, obviously, we get responses so we know if they're learning, we know if our teaching is powerful, So it allows us to monitor their understanding. If they're just sitting there passively, how do I know it and that they're learning? Until I make it visible, that they say something, they write something, they do something. And I can monitor that, give them feedback, and I can also get feedback on the quality of my own instruction. And from that, I'm going to adjust the lesson. So this is the purpose we're going to focus on, is to look at their responses that we've made visible because they're saying things, writing things, doing things, so that we can give feedback, which will increase their learning. And also, we can adjust our lesson so it's more powerful. Really important thing to do. And sometimes we do. We get so caught up in just the action of the lesson that we forget the outcome is learning, and that we are to be looking carefully so we can see if learning is occurring and adjust our lesson. Well, so this is the one we're going to focus on. And some active participation procedures just make more difference for this purpose of embedded formative assessment. So, for example, here is a listing of all the possible ways we might get responses. But some of them are simply more powerful in terms of us being able to judge the learning of individual students and the whole group, on which we're going to give feedback and adjust our lesson. For example, yes, we can get choral responses from students. I could say, this word is was, what word? And all of you would say was. But I'd get some idea if you were getting it, but not as much as if I called on an individual student to say that response. But then I have management problems because I'm calling on one and there's 27 other people. So I might have you read the words to your partner. And when you're reading them to your partner, saying it to your partner, then I could go around and listen in. So partners allow us to hone in on individual students as we monitor. So it's a little bit more powerful for the purpose, not for the purpose of practice, not for the purpose of engagement, but for being able to use it as embedded formative assessment. For example, for written responses, maybe I'm going to have you write on your whiteboard and hold it up. And I'm going to look around and I'm going to see all of the 28 students holding it up, and boom, I can immediately get an idea of, are they learning it? What are the mistakes that they are making? Now, they could write the same response on paper, but then when I went to monitor around the room, I might only see 3 or 4 of them, not all 28. So whiteboards are right up there with the tools that allow us to have very good embedded formative assessment, feedback on the quality of our teaching, feedback for the students on the quality of their learning. Well, let's look at another example. I could have you do a gesture, but one that has great utility for embedded formative assessment are hand signals. And so I could have you indicate, let's say I am teaching in biology, and we are finishing up a unit on prokaryote and eukaryote cells, and I put up a multiple choice item. And you have to figure out what the answer is, and then you have to show me with hand signals. Well, again, the benefit is I can monitor everybody in the room. And so it's giving me much fuller immediate input on whether I should go forward, whether I need to reteach that concept, whether they are getting it. And that is the purpose of embedded formative assessment. Well, let's say the students are reading, and we might read choral reading. We might do close. I read, stop, and you say the next word. We might do echo reading. I read, you read. But here I've highlighted 2 that would be useful for me to really use it as embedded formative assessment. Maybe I'm going to have you read silently. And as you're reading silently, I come to you, put my hand on your paper, my hand on your back, and you whisper read to me. Well, in just 30 seconds, I can get an idea if you are accurate. I can get an idea if you're fluent. I can get an idea if you are not just accurate and fluent, but have prosody or expression. Now, in choral reading, it's excellent for practice. There's no negativity on any of these procedures. We're just looking for the ones that we could use for that special purpose of embedded formative assessment. And so, yes, choral reading provides great practice. Closed reading, I read, stop, you say the next word. Everybody's on task, they're getting the content, they're reading. But when we do silent reading and have them whisper read to us, then we could really make an assessment of it, particularly if we had like a clipboard where we wrote down their names and we recorded data on just that little bit of time. Were they accurate and fluent and expressive? I often give them on my chart a 4. Are they accurate and fluent but have not yet developed expression? A 3. I might have students who are accurate but not fluent. A 2. And a 1, neither accurate or fluent. Now I have some useful embedded formative assessment. I can look right across, and maybe one student has a 4, 4, 3, 3, 4, 4, 4, 4, 3. I say, whoa, for a 4th grader, this book is, the placement for this child is really working out. They are demonstrating fluency, accuracy, and, depending on the passage, expression. I have another student that is a 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 2, 1. I say, oh, most of the time neither accurate or fluent. I'd better be getting intervention for that child. I'd better be certain that they are getting more input on critical decoding and fluency areas so that they will be gaining more. So it gives me information. That's what embedded formative assessment is meant to do. Now, interestingly enough, partner reading allows me that. For example, if I say, ones, read this paragraph to your partner, I can again go around and monitor and listen in to individual students. And I'll have great feedback on it. I can do the same thing. A 1, not accurate or fluent. 2, accurate but not fluent. A 3, accurate and fluent. A 4, accurate and fluent with expression. So it gives me an opportunity for that embedded formative assessment. Well, let's look at some examples, because I did have a great gift in the last few weeks to really think about this and also to design examples, and also within my own demonstration lessons have examples. So you be thinking about which of these might be adaptable to your own needs. So, well, one possibility is, well, let's just get the big idea here. I'm going to talk about this as intentional embedded assessment. I mean, every time students make a response, I can look carefully, listen carefully, and use that information every time they make a response. So even a choral response, and I hear 2 kids that didn't have it accurate, and so I then repeat it and have them have the whole class practice. So every moment that kids give a response, I am so present, you're so present, that we can judge their learning. But we also would benefit by having some intentional embedded assessment. You say to yourself, based on the learning intention and the success criteria, this is when I will know if they've learned it and can thus or not and adjust my lesson, and they also can. So these would be infused very intentionally for that purpose. Did they learn the knowledge, skill, strategy, concept, or rule? Okay, so let's look at some examples. And first, we all teach vocabulary. It's a perfect place to start. Now, one of the things that I gained by rereading the books by Dylan William was how to convey the goal or objective of the lesson. I want to talk to you about this for a minute, sort of my new aha. So in the past, I might have had an objective that said when the students are asked a question about these words, and then I'd list the words in the objective, they will be able to tell the meaning of it and write it in a sentence. Well, one of the things that Dylan William talks about is setting it up as a learning intention. I intend to learn it, and I intend to teach it. I love that. Even versus a goal. You know, a goal is like something that's out there. Like, probably for 30 years, I've had a goal to weigh like 120. But it wasn't obviously an intention, or I would have like done something. So the learning intention simply gives it a different energy than a goal. But one of the things we've often done is contextualize the goals. And so it might have had all of the words that we were teaching in this lesson in the goal. But what he makes a very good point at is that it's not just these words that you're hoping the student learns, but that they constantly are adding more words to their lexicon. And so that we could use a general learning intention without the context, removing the context. So instead of listing all the words within the objective, having something like, students will understand the meaning of vocabulary words and use the words accurately. And this could be a learning intention for words I'm pre-teaching for reading. It could be words that I'm teaching in science or social studies. It could be words that I am teaching in a math class. And the success criteria, the way that I was doing the vocabulary, is that when given a vocabulary term or meaning, they could determine what is the vocabulary term. But then also, I had as a second success criteria that when given two words that I've taught, that they could write a meaningful sentence that would display accurately the use. Now, I'm always looking for things that lead to good outcomes for children and teachers, but also reduce the actual workload of the teacher. And this is one of them, because I could use this very well for one vocabulary lesson and another and another. Though the context, the words would change, this would be the same. Now let me give you another example on this big idea. So one day I was teaching in high school last year a lesson on LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson. And the point of the lesson I was teaching was that often the background of the president, their experiences, and the different roles that they've served in will predict how they might respond as a president, that they're not safe and separate from their background. But I had a very specific intention, and it was when I did the goal that by learning about the background of LBJ and his service in the House of Representatives and the Congress, that we would be able to predict how he might respond as a president and his policies. It was very specific to LBJ. But when I read the book by Dylan William and his idea about context-free learning intentions, I could instead have an intention that when we study the background of any politician, we have a good way to think about how they might act in the future, what would be their actions. Because I really didn't want them just to know about LBJ. I wanted them to have a way of looking at many presidents, many politicians. So I took the context out so we could use that objective, that learning intention many, many times. Okay? All right, so now you're my students. And so be ready to respond, because I'm going to teach a little lesson, and then I will do the type of embedded formative assessment that really gave me an idea if they knew it or not. Okay, so you're my students. This will also give us a chance to review teaching vocabulary. And this was a lesson out of Treacherous, and so this reflects the actual learning instructional sequence that's used in that reading program. So be my students. Our first word is frigid. Say the word, everyone. Frigid. And its part of speech is an adjective. What part of speech, everyone? An adjective. Right. Remember, an adjective tells about a noun, about a person or a place or a thing. And read the definition with me. Keep your voice with mine and begin. Frigid weather is very cold. And here's an example, because we read a few weeks ago an entry from the Old Farmer's Almanac. And so in that, it might do this, and read it with me. The Old Farmer's Almanac predicts a frigid winter for the Northeast. So we know that frigid is referring to very cold. And I want you to think of a time that you experienced frigid temperatures of water or air. So think about it. And you're going to tell your partner, and pretend you have a partner, and you're going to start by saying, one time that I experienced frigid temperatures was, and first ones, then twos. Say it to your partner. Now, of course, at this time, I would be monitoring students, and I could listen in to a number, but not all 28, and I could get an idea if they understood frigid. It was very interesting because last week I was using this example in Modesto, California, and Modesto, you know, had weather in the 40s and 45, 46, and for the people that are online from Alaska, you would not think that that was frigid, but you should have seen all of the participants in their coats, in their gloves, in their hats. They thought it was frigid. Okay? So at this moment, we really wouldn't be able to check everybody out. And I continued that lesson, taught them treacherous, had a definition, illustrated with an example, and asked them questions to check their understanding, and asked them what a synonym for treacherous was. Very dangerous. And then we had uninhabited, and again, I had them read the definition, we gave an example, and they had to share an answer with a partner. So there was many responses within the lesson, reading the definition, reading the example, thinking of the answer here, how are the terms uninhabited and empty similar, and also how uninhabited and empty are different. And they said these answers to their partner. So that is embedded formative assessment, but I wanted even a clear idea of their understanding of the meaning that went beyond that. So we did exactly this. We first had, just as a reminder, learned about the family of words, and then at the end of the lesson, I had them do this. Let's see if I can. Okay, why are we, you have it in front of you, but there we go. I used hand signals. I had the words up and numbered them. I asked a question, had them form the number so that I could see it, and then first on their desk they did it, and I went around and looked, and then I said, show me, and they held it up. And at that moment, I was able to check out not just one student or two or three, but everybody in the whole class. So this would be a great benefit to get everybody involved using hand signals. So pretend. Okay? Students, here we have the words that we have learned, and let's first just take a moment and say the words. The first word is the word frigid. What word? And next word, number 2, is treacherous. What word? Next word is triumph. What word? Next word is uninhabited. What word? Next word is expedition. What word? Next word is labor. What word? And the last word, number 7, is dismantled. What word? And then I would have very intentional formative assessment. I'm thinking of a word that means it's a synonym for work. On your desk, and do it. For the number for it. And everybody high in the air, show me. And they show me 6. And the word is what, everyone? Labor. I am thinking of a word that is a synonym for very, very dangerous. When something's dangerous. For example, when we read about the expedition and they came to the leads in the ice, that was, and form the number on your table, and high in the air. Yes, the word is treacherous. Now, I really can hone in. I can judge the quality of my teaching. I can look at the quality of their learning, and I can say, we need more practice. And when I did this, I actually was able to find the word that I should have spent more time on, and that was uninhabited. And so I needed to go back and go over that word again, give more examples, check their understanding, come back to it the next day. Hand signals. I used all kinds of oral reading, oral responses, choral responses, closed responses as I taught it, but intentional embedded formative assessment was done with hand signals. And just to show you another possibility, because that same day I had the students write a sentence using the words uninhabited and treacherous. And they had to write one sentence. Now, why would I have them put 2 words in it? Well, you've seen this. Maybe I'm going to check your understanding and ask you to write one sentence for each of these words. And here's what I get. It was frigid. It was treacherous. It was a triumph. It was uninhabited. It was an expedition. It was labor. It was dismantled, which doesn't give me any information about it. But if you have to write a sentence that includes 2 of the word in a meaningful way, now we have something that is very useful for checking your understanding. And so we have here a written response. And written responses do allow very intentional embedded formative assessment, because I can go around and look at your responses. I could have you write it on paper, collect it, and look at it to make a decision about what I'm doing on my next lesson. And so written responses are a very good way to do intentional embedded formative assessment. So, for example, I might have a checklist for any sentences. And this could be part of the success criteria. And we might use it for different things. Like here, they're writing a sentence that has 2 words in it. And I am holding them accountable for the quality of the sentence as well as the accurate use of the 2 vocabulary words. That their sentence begins with a capital, ends with a period, their spelling's correct, the handwriting is neat, it's a complete sentence and makes sense. Now, this is another example of having a success criteria that could be used again and again. We answer questions in language arts at the end of a passage, and every time we do it, there's a certain learning intention about the content, and there is in the quality of the sentences. So this is just a reminder of the use of written responses as a very clear response that we could use for embedded formative assessment. Now, here was a lesson that I taught, and again, it's an example of having a decontextualized learning intention. So maybe I am a first grade teacher, and the students can blend sounds into words. And boy, we're going to be working on this with different letter sound associations throughout the year, but this is the big idea. They can blend sounds into words and a written form, and that they will say the words correctly and quickly. And then the content is that we're going to be using A and AY, AI, and AE in that lesson. But the benefit here is that this learning intention and this success criteria is used again and again and again, and only the content and context will change. Well, that day, I said to myself, here's the words that we were learning. Yes, you can see AY and A and AI. So we be my students, and we'll just review how we taught this. We had already gone over the sounds, and look at that first row. Put your finger under it, and everybody sound that word out to yourself. Put your thumb up when you know it. And the word is may. Good. Go to the next word. Sound it out. Put your thumb up when you know it. And class, say the word way. So we're having active participation. They're touching the words. They're sounding it out. They're saying it as a choral response. And then I said to myself, I really want to know, though, in a little more depth, did they get it? And so I actually did two things. One, intentional embedded formative assessment, which I actually used hand signals again. So I said to the students, looking at the top row, I'm going to tell you about a word. Figure out which word I am talking about. Put your number on the table. And when I say show me, show it in the air. So I am thinking about a word that is an action you do with money. Read the words to yourself and form the number on your table. And show me. And the student showed me pay. So that was one further indication. But I said to myself, not still perfect. So when the kids lined up to go out to recess, their exit ticket out the door was, I had this in front of me, I touch a word, you say it, I touch another word, you say it, you're out. What word, gone. What word, gone. What word, gone. So I actually checked individuals, because one of my decisions is, do I have some students who are consistently inaccurate? And maybe one of the actions I take is a pre-teach group. I'll remind you of some of the studies that have found pre-teaching often is more powerful than reteaching, particularly on early decoding, given the studies that were done at University of Oregon. By pre-teaching the sounds, pre-teaching reading the words, and then the students being in the class decoding lesson, it made more difference than you didn't get what we did in class today and we're going to reteach it. Why would it make more difference? Well, I'm going into that lesson and I already have background knowledge to attach it to. So I'm going to be more accurate. Number two, I'm going to have more confidence. When the teacher says, put your finger on the word today, I recognize it, so I'm more confident. So, hand signals, that's just one of the tools we could use for intentional, embedded formative assessment. Well, what else might we do? Well, here was a lesson that I read the lesson in the teacher's manual, and it was a grammar lesson embedded within a core reading program. and that content that day was to be able to use the words be, do, and have correctly. And I looked at the exercises, and the teacher was to introduce it, and then the students were to copy a sentence and put in the right verb. And I just said to myself, there must be some way that we could make this more interesting. And so, again, I said, first of all, this learning intention, students will be able to use the correct form of a word, and students will be able to select the correct word to complete a sentence. I can use this with many different types of context, of content. And so here was the lesson that I taught. So popping over, I introduced have and had. Let's see how fascinating this lesson was. And that today I have a book, yesterday I had a book. The boys have books, yesterday the boys had books. The boy has a book, the boy had a book. So that had is used consistently for past tense. Though in present tense, it depends on if it is I gets have, plural gets have, singular gets has. Okay, so I could introduce this, but then the students have these sentences that they're going to fill, and I said, why not instead have them use response cards as another technique for excellent embedded formative assessment. So the students wrote on their cards exactly what you might expect. They wrote have, they wrote has, and they wrote had. So they had 3 index cards in front of them. So we have those written down, forms of have, and then instead of copying these sentences and writing in the word, we read them, and so be my students. And when we read it, say blank. The field blank, plenty of green plants. The field blank, plenty of green plants. Say it to yourself using have, has, and had. And then we're just going to pretend that you have a response card. Put your finger on the correct word. Now, I'm monitoring, and I said, I see that some of you have it on has. The field has plenty of green plants. Some of you have it on had. The field had plenty of green plants. So because it's not happening at this moment, we're going to use the past tense. So put your finger on the past tense that goes with field. And show me. Everybody held up had. Hey, go to the next sentence. And remember, when we get to the line, say blank. We blank buckets for picking strawberries. And touch the card that is correct. And show me. And they held it up. So I just, as I taught this and worked with this little exercise, I said, in this case, the use of response cards makes this much more interesting. The students are more alive, they're more active, but it gives me also even better formative assessment. And then there's some teacher benefits. I don't have an extra stack of papers. I don't have to grade them and give them back. I'm doing it all in real time. They're saying what the answer is. I'm giving them feedback. I'm explaining any answers if there were errors, and we are moving right through it. And I'm getting great feedback on, are they getting the big idea? So response fingers and response cards, 2 excellent tools for embedded formative assessment. Well, let's look at, in more depth, written responses. And so students certainly can do written responses because I can hold everybody accountable. Everybody's writing it, and I can go around and monitor their responses, and later I could look at all of them. So written responses are definitely useful for formative assessment. So here, the students were to learn how to write dialogue between two characters. And it's one that we're going to actually do many times during the year, so that they're going to have two characters from a passage and they're going to write dialogue. And so the intention is that students can write dialogue between two characters. Now, the characters are not specified. The story that it doesn't go with it is not specified. It is context-free, because I don't just want them to learn how to write a dialogue between Chris and Mark from our story. No, I want them to learn how to write dialogue so that I could use the same learning attention more than one time. You can see I'm kind of excited about context-free goals and objectives. And the success criteria. Oftentimes, just a little checklist makes it clearer for me what I'm looking for, makes it clearer for the student. That's the checklist. Makes clear who is speaking. Does it say, said Mark, explained Jason? Write exactly what each person said, not something like Jason said that, and said Jason shouted out, comma, and then had the quote. And they use quotations around the exact words, and they use a variety of words, not just said. So pretty powerful in that we can use this anytime we write a story and it has embedded dialogue in it. We could ask, was it clear who's speaking? Did we say exactly what they said? Did we have quotation marks and a variety of said words? And so they're writing, and I can look at their writing for the purpose of embedded formative assessment. I hope you're getting excited about this. It seems like a topic that is not very exciting, but it's very exciting in terms of learning. If I want you to learn, I have to have clear learning intention and success criteria. I have to teach it really well, and then I have to monitor so I can provide you feedback as well as I could adjust the lesson. Well, what are our other possibilities? So there we had written responses, and this is another class where after reading a passage, students will be able to generate quality questions and corresponding answers. And so this was one that was utilized within a 5th grade program, but I could do this as a definite learning intention and comprehension, whether it's 3rd graders read a passage and they generated questions and wrote answers. 8th graders in social studies, after they wrote a section, they had to write 4 really good questions, and they also had to write out the answers. And I'm going to gain a lot of understanding of their learning by looking at the quality of their questions and their answers. But I do need a success criteria. And so, in terms of the question, that it begins with a capital, that it ends with a question mark, that is correct spelling, and it makes sense. Number 1, it focuses on critical content. And then their answers. Their answer is accurate and complete, that they've generated for that question. And again, I have a success criteria. That the answer uses some of the words from the question. It's a complete sentence. It makes sense. It begins with a capital letter, ends with a period, and has correct spelling. So as an example, if the students, see if I can make this go forward. Let's see, Jackie, are you available to help me?
I am.
Yes.
See if I can advance that. Did that switch to the...
Yeah, if you could see if you can advance it. There we go. Yay, thank you. So the question was, why was the expedition across the North Pole treacherous? And that's the students generated it after they read the article. Woo, good job. And then they had to write down the answer. And then they could, and I could monitor it. They could turn it in and I could look at it because this would really reflect the quality of the questions. If they just said, where did the explorers go? Not as deep as we might want. This would be much deeper and I could look at their answer. So written responses, once again, are very useful in terms of embedded formative assessment. And see if we can, there we are. And here's just another example of a student's question and the kind of answer, and we could look at it in regards to the success criteria for the question, success criteria for the answer. Well, one that I use often now, and I bet you do too, are whiteboards. Again, the benefit is the students write on the whiteboards, they hold it up, and the teacher can monitor the whole group, thus have more input on the quality of my teaching and their quality of their learning. It gives me a better idea of the feedback I need to give, as well as the adjustment in the lesson. So it seems that recently I've had many times where I've had the chance to teach the Engage New York math program. So I used one of my examples for it with whiteboards. Now the class that I was at, they had basically whiteboards, but the whiteboard was an app that was on their iPad. So there we have it, and the students were able to draw their diagrams on it. They were able to write out their problem and show it. And so they would work, and I could monitor as they're working, and then I'd say, show me, and then I could monitor all of the students. So whiteboards, again, have such great utility. So you don't have the stimulus for that lesson, but let me show it here because I do have it. So it was a lesson on being able to solve story problems. And so the learning intention, right from that lesson, was that the students could solve word problems, and it's context-free. Notice that again, because we're going to do this often. We have many lessons where the goal is that students can solve the word problems. And then the success criteria. The answer is correct. The answer is labeled. A mathematical sentence is used to convey the answer. And visuals are used to convey understanding of the problem and the steps used in finding an answer. And this context for this lesson was that they could solve problems involving the division of whole numbers in the form of fractions or whole numbers. But that's the context. The students can solve word problems was a theme throughout the whole math period of that year. And the context would be changed, but the success criteria would be consistent. Now, because of the fact that I really need to think and prepare for these lessons, what I normally do is actually write out the lesson so that I have thought through it. So here is the first problem, which I did and I do on it. I modeled it. A total of 2 yards of fabric is used to make 5 identical pillows. How much fabric is used for each pillow? So I showed the students how we look at the whole, which is we have 2 yards, and it's in 5 units. So I divided this into 5 units, and our goal is to figure out what 1 unit is in terms of yards. So I demonstrated we have 5 units, which equals 2 yards. If we want 1 unit, we'll have 2 divided by 5, and we'll have 2/5 of a yard. So I modeled this. And then I modeled it again with ice cream sundaes, 4 pints, 6 units, how much ice cream goes into each sundae, and it came out to be 4/6 of a pint. Actually, some of the children thought it should have been a little more, but okay. And then we did it together, and where we read the problem together, and they made just a graphic, and then they put it on their whiteboard and showed me, gave me feedback. Then I had them write the equality equation, and then go to 1 unit, and then figure out that 1 unit. So this is how much banana goes on each sundae, which is 1.5 banana, which is very generous in the area of bananas, less so in terms of ice cream. And then the next one we did where I asked them, we read the problem, and they made the visual representing the 2 parts that were equal and the units, and this was how many articles are you going to read in 8 evenings, and so how much article you're going to read, which is they had to read 1/2 of an article every night in order to complete the assignment. But we did it step by step, gradual release of responsibility. And then watching their performance, because this is all getting engaged in embedded formative assessment, because every time I ask them for a response, I'm looking for that answer. Every time I move around the room and monitor, I am. And so we did another one, but a little less help from me, more responsibility from them. And then finally, I had them do an item that I intentionally used for embedded formative assessment, intentionally, because I'd said to myself, the answer, they need to do it on their own. They need to have the correct answer. They need to label the answer. They need to write out a sentence that explains that answer. So they had that success criteria that we wanted. Answers correct, answers labeled, mathematical sentence is used, visuals are used to convey understanding. And from that, I had also intentional action, that I would then give them feedback by going over it with the whole group, which means that it would affirm some students, it would correct others, and then I would have small group instruction for students, because we had more problems to solve, that were having difficulty. So I adjusted the lesson based on the feedback. But the whiteboards, I could have had them just write on paper, but the whiteboards allowed them to hold it up, and I could really monitor carefully and find students who needed my assistance. So another great tool for intentional embedded formative assessment. Well, this one was pretty disappointing too, because there were 5 pizzas and 40 students, and how much pizza did everybody get? 1/8 of a pizza. 1/8. Wow. All right. And so then I worked with a small group, and we did problems together, going back to doing more we do it with me. It was so interesting when I was using this example. I had a 6th grade teacher come up after me and to share with you what he said. He said, Anita, you know, this is my 2nd career. And I first was a plumber. And I became a plumber by working with a plumber. And he said, you know, explicit instruction is just an apprentice model. It's just like an apprentice if you were learning how to be a plumber. That first, I was out with a plumber, and we did very simple jobs, and he demonstrated how to do it and told me as I was doing it everything that we had to do. Just like when you taught that math lesson, the first problems, you told us what to do, you modeled it for us, you told us what you were thinking. And my plumber mentee would do that with the same project a number of times, and then would move to what you called a we do it, where we did it together. where there was more responsibility for me. And at first, he had heavily scaffolded. He'd say, okay, get these 2 tools out, lay them in front of you, pick up this one, and so he'd go very systematically through it. And then, as an apprentice model, then we would do it together, but without as much assistance. And so we just say, get the right tools, and then sometimes ask me, what's the first step? Now do it. What's the next step? Now do it. And then over time, it went to look at this. What do you presume is the challenge? What are the tools we need? What's the first action you're going to take? And then finally, you do it, and I'll look at the outcome. And I said to myself, you know, explicit instruction is an apprentice model. It is an apprentice model of I do it, we do it, you do it. But throughout that is that constant feedback that comes from embedded formative assessment, the constant teacher manipulation and changing what we're doing based on that. Well, so we could use whiteboards. If I want to check your reading, and we have a large group of kids, there's many ways we could read the material, but whisper reading and partner reading allow me to hone in on individuals and collect some data even to get an idea of the kids' performance. Well, I'm looking at the time and I can't believe that our time is almost up. Again, we're getting responses in intentional embedded formative assessment, and we're monitoring it. And just as we've talked about, sometimes we walk around, look around, talk around to gain that information, and then we are going to provide feedback. See if I can make this go forward. I'm getting stuck on circulating. And let's try one more time. Jackie, can you help me out?
You are showing that it's moving. It may just be slow.
Oh.
But you're on the slide number 40.
Yeah, we might have, so we're monitoring, looking and listening with the purpose of are we going to not just give feedback, but make any adaptations in the lesson as well as in the future lesson. My hope is that we will be more mindful about embedded formative assessment and use those active participation tools and utilize clear learning intentions and success criteria to constantly be sure that our students are gaining from our instruction. I applaud your work in this area, and right now in our world, we have a responsibility to make public education and charter and private education as strong as we can for all of our students. So may you have a event-free winter. Some of you have had plenty of events this winter, and I look forward to talking to you our next time we have a webinar, and invite your colleagues to join us in Portland for the TOT this summer. And that information, let me just see if we can find that, is right there. That's just available now for people to sign up for the TOT that you attended if you came to Portland. And we're having it 1 week in June and 4 days in July. So thank you, and thank you, Jackie. Do we have any questions that popped up, Jackie?
I haven't seen any questions. I think we'll give it just a minute.
All right.
We appreciate you taking the time, Anita, to review these strategies. We appreciate everybody joining us today.
Absolutely.
Our next webinar follow-up for the TOT is coming up on April 12th. Anita is also going to present a webinar for us on March 6th, talking about the magic of instruction. And then, as Anita mentioned, registration is open for the 2 conference weeks coming up. Last year, those sessions filled by late February, early March. So if you're considering them, you'll definitely want to get in touch with us much sooner than later.
Excellent. All right, I think that we're all done. Thank you all. So there are some questions.
Yeah, I see them just coming in.
Yes.
I can answer the question about the posters, Tony. If you send an email in response to the webinar invite to info@pacificnwpublish.com, we can talk about options for looking at those posters and getting them to Australia or available for you. We do have a distributor in Australia. They don't think they have that product yet, but we can certainly tackle some of that, putting that in motion. Anita, we've got a request for your email address or postal address.
My email address is archerteach@aol.com.
Terrific. I think that's it. And always, you know, if you have questions, you can send them on to us and we can help you out with them or get them passed along to Anita, or you can always email Anita. And if there's questions that need to come back to us, she'll get them to us.
Thank you very much, everyone. Happy 2017.
All right. Thanks, all.